Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Starfinder, the new Pathfinder tabletop role-playing game core rulebook that is expected later in 2017 or in 2018. Okay. Now, this was actually announced in Q4 of 2016, and people were very excited because it's a big change in the tabletop role-playing game industry. Now, the reason why I'm talking about it today is there was an absolutely fantastic interview on Taking 20. So there's a gentleman there. His name is Cody. He does a podcast called Taking 20. It's a really, really good tabletop role-playing game podcast. Its focus is on online play, which is really not my thing. But Cody does a great job of realizing it doesn't matter if you're that there's a lot of story elements that can be talked about. So Cody does a good job of equipping dungeon masters to tell good stories, to be able to manage their players well, and things that are universal to games that are played at a table, rather than online. So, but he did a really fantastic interview with James Sutter. James Sutter is one of the writers on Paizo's Starfinder project, and Starfinder, the tabletop role-playing game core rulebook. And it was just really, this interview was highly valuable to me as a tabletop role-playing game industry wonk. And the reason why is I really feel like Starfinder is an extremely important book, because we're getting to see a book that's being made for a very specific purpose. And that purpose is, how do you handle being a company that's on the ropes? And I really feel that Paizo is on the ropes. Pathfinder is a really important game that came out when 4th edition came out. 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons was widely rejected by the Dungeons & Dragons community. And Paizo swooped in and used the OGL to create Pathfinder, which was really Dungeons & Dragons 3.75. That is absolutely the best way to describe Pathfinder, in my opinion. So they made a lot of money for a lot of years playing in Wizards of the Coast, playing in Dungeons & Dragons Yard, right? And they were able to do that because that Yard had been essentially abandoned by Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons with 4th edition. Excuse me. So, now, Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons had no intention of doing that. I'm a big fan of 4th edition, but the reality is, it cannot be argued. You can argue over whether 4th edition was a good edition or not, but you cannot argue that 4th edition cut the community in half, right? And there were just hundreds of thousands of players that rejected the product, and it put Dungeons & Dragons into a crisis zone, right? And that crisis zone lasted for 8 years, and during those years, Paizo ate Wizards of the Coast and ate Dungeons & Dragons' lunch. Just, that's the way it is. That's what happened, right? Now, the chickens have come to roost. During that time, Paizo had an opportunity to create something really unique, create something that was their own, create something that wasn't a product that was serving a community that had really been built by someone else, right? They had an opportunity to create their own community, and I don't really feel they did that. They took a patch of disgruntled Dungeons & Dragons players and they fed them for 8 years, right? And they fed them well. It was beef stroganoff. It was good stuff. I played Pathfinder, and it's fantastic. It was amazing. Wayne Reynolds did the art, kind of led the art direction. It was an amazing game. But the second Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition came out, I dropped it like a hot potato, and I think a lot of other people are doing that right now. And Paizo is really on the ropes, right? So what does a company who's in trouble in tabletop role-playing game, especially a company that has real offices with real people with real jobs, this is the highest tier of the tabletop role-playing game industry. Paizo is a real company with real people, with real buildings and real jobs. That's what's on the line here, right? The vast majority of tabletop role-playing games right now are one-man bands and just really small shops, that are just getting it out, and that's great. But I'm really fascinated what's going to happen with Paizo. So Starfinder is Pathfinder's shot back into the limelight, back into major profitability, back into. I'm not saying they're not making profit at this point. I'm just saying that without a doubt, when I look at Pathfinder, there are very few Pathfinder products that aren't talking about a 5e conversion almost immediately upon their creation, right? So that's a big deal, right? And Pathfinder is in a different place right now than it was, right? So with that said, let me talk about James Sutter's interview. So here's what he said. And the reason why I'm calling this out is these are Paizo's moves, right? Number one rule, most important thing James Sutter said in that entire interview. It was like a 45-minute interview with Cody at Taking 20. He said, Starfinder will be conceptually compatible with Pathfinder. He confirmed that they will be creating new rule systems, right? And that with conversion, the old Pathfinder material will be usable with Starfinder. That means, okay, new rule system, right? In my opinion, source books are the worst. Source books are just absolute worst thing in the tabletop role-playing game industry right now. And the reason why is almost every source book out there, like the first thing that's said is it's great source material. A lot of times they're unusable. People are writing source books and then people buy them to use them for source material, right? But the reality is, if you have to do conversion, most dungeon masters don't want to do that. Most game masters do not want to do conversions, right? And the fact that they're saying that Starfinder will only be conceptually compatible and that conversions will be able to be needed to use those old Pathfinder books says that they're really not going to, in my opinion, they're not going to be usable, right? Nobody wants to sit there and do like you don't have time. Like, you need to move your stories quickly. You don't have time to be doing conversion at the table. And if you need to do conversion away from the table, why on earth would anybody deal with that? Why is anybody going to be, why would any game master, when there's already, I'm talking over 1,000 tabletop role-playing games and well over 100 tabletop role-playing games that are amazing, that play straight out of the book, that don't need conversions, who's going to take the time to do all that conversion work, right? So now, here's the issue. I think this is fantastic. I think this is absolutely the way to go. And I think Paizo is doing the right thing, right? What they're trying to do with this statement by saying it's conceptually compatible is they don't want to upset the people who have a stack of 20 Pathfinder books. Now, let's be clear. I used to be that guy. I own 3 Pathfinder books now, right? I own their equipment guide, I own the core rule book, and I own the NPC Codex. The NPC Codex, in my opinion, is one of the best books that's ever been written for tabletop role-playing games. I wish the NPC Codex existed for every single game system, but it doesn't, right? So, and I sold no less than like 15 Pathfinder books because Dungeons & Dragons is back, man. Like, you don't eat a Burger King burger if Shake Shack is there, right? Dungeons & Dragons is the real deal, and Pathfinder was always playing in Dungeons & Dragons yard, right? And so it's back, and Pathfinder is really on the ropes now, right? Now, with that said, the Paizo guys had a decision to make. They had to decide, hey, are we going to build our game on a rule system that's 8 to 10 years old? And they said, no, of course we're not going to do that. And that was the right decision, because the Pathfinder rule system is beautiful and brilliant if you want to play 1990s Dungeons and Dragons, right? But it's 2017, and if you want to play a fast-paced, exciting game with new rule mechanics, right, and exciting new ways for players to tell stories quickly, and for all that, then you need a new rule system. So I'm very excited that that Paizo is choosing to make a new rule system for Starfinder, right? The other thing he said, the other thing that James Sutter said was that he wants Starfinder to be for space opera what Shadowrun was for Cyberpunk. Great goal, right? So they want to define a genre. They want to define a genre with this game, right? Now, actually, I think that's a cool idea. And the reason now, the other issue is what is your competition if you have a tabletop role-playing game, space opera? Well, your biggest competition right now is Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars game, right? Star Wars is iconic space opera, right? That is going to be very hard to compete with them. Now, they do have some great choices in there. One, I think a lot of Star Wars role-playing game people will play another space opera game, right? Because you're coming at space opera from a completely different angle, right? And it's like I think there might be room to get some of those Star Wars players, not to have them stop playing FFG, but to have them play also Starfinder, right? So I think that's really cool. I think that's a great idea. Some of the things he said about format I thought was awesome. He said that they are going to do a hardback, a PDF, and an SRD, right? That's great. They're holding on to their traditions there because they've always done SRDs, they've always done PDFs, and he said, we can't have a science fiction game that you actually can't play on your tablet. That's just ridiculous. So I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. I see where you're going there. Now that's really interesting because Dungeons & Dragons does not offer an official PDF of their game at all. And so, that's a huge deal. That's a really big deal. That is it's still a juncture point where Wizards of the Coast is saying, we're not letting this game out in electronic copies. We want you buying the hardbacks. I'm okay with that. It's Dungeons & Dragons. They get to play by their own rules. I mean, they are the big dog on the playground. So I feel like that's okay for Dungeons & Dragons. I think that's hard for anybody else to do. So that was really big news. The other thing that he said was Cody did such a great job with this interview. He said, hey, are you going to do everything you did for Pathfinder for Starfinder? Now, I understood this fully by what he meant by everything. So James had already said that they're doing a hardback, they're doing a PDF, and they're doing an SRD. Well, what else is done for Pathfinder? A lot, right? So there is a card game for Pathfinder. There is a video game for Pathfinder. There is a miniatures line for Pathfinder. There are pawn sets for Pathfinder. There are monthly subscription adventures for Pathfinder, right? These are huge. These are large product lines. And James Sutter said, no, we are not doing that. We're not doing everything we did for Pathfinder for Starfinder, which I think is fascinating. They're pulling it back and they're saying, hey, we need to do things different with this game if we're going to make this work. If we're going to win back, players, we need to take a different approach. And I think that is very, very wise, right? So one of the things that they're going to change, one of the things he said was, and this is another reason why I'm actually talking about this today, was James Sutter said they are going to do 2 hardbacks a year. 2 hardbacks a year. That is very low for the pace of Pathfinder. Pathfinder has been putting out tons and tons and tons of books for their product, right? And so he's saying, hey, we're going to slow it down. And he said something, James Sutter said something really, really interesting. He said, I want every word to count, right? And I was like, whoa, that is huge, right? And the reason why I'm talking about this today is I feel like James Sutter was acknowledging what I have come to believe about tabletop role-playing games, that source books are terrible. Every source book made for every tabletop role-playing game makes the game worse, okay? So here's how. It encourages system mastery, it encourages rules lawyers, and it very much punishes new players and casual players, right? And then in addition to that, when a new version of the game comes out, it is a knife to the throat of the players because they have a stack of books, a soda can or 2 soda cans or 3 soda cans high off the table. And that is brutal. You're losing $500, $1,000, $1,500, right? It's very hard for players, right? So source books, they're tradition. They're tradition within the industry. But this was, in my opinion, confirmation that other companies are starting to see this and say, oh my gosh, if we just put out splat book after splat book after splat book, it does not help our game. In fact, it hurts our game. And that if you put out an amazing core rulebook and you let that core rulebook stand, that might be enough. That might be enough to have the game do great. Now, what the companies have to now do is they have to determine, how do we manage this? How do we actually manage this as companies, and how do we make money on a game where we create it and we stop making books for it? That is a great question, and I think the industry needs to answer that. I'll put my thoughts on that specific question in another video, but I just want to take a moment and point everybody over to Taking 20, Cody's interview with James Sutter. It's absolutely fantastic content. I've given you the highlights of the stuff that I thought was really important from it. The biggest takeaway, conceptually compatible, right? That means a new rule system. And that's huge. That's huge news. Take care.